Today's lesson is the scientific method and the nature of science. The word science comes from the Latin scientia, which means to know or knowledge. Modern science is a process by which we try to understand how the natural world works. The nature of science, and you'll hear that term, nature of science, that's the process, that's the scientific method. How do we go about testing, revising, and discarding theories? We are always looking at, is there a new way, is there a better way, is there a different way, to lead to a better understanding of how things work in the world, but not to absolute truth. There are 3 good activities on this site called the Lessons of the Nature of Science, and you can actually go and click there. I'm going to click there today and show you one of the lessons. The lesson that I'm going to show you is actually the fossil footprints. And we talk to our students about making inferences, and inferences is one of the areas that they seem to do fairly poorly on the state test, whether that's the TAKS test or the New STAR test. But this would be an example in science how to teach those inferences. You would start with something like this where you have those dinosaur footprints or some type of an animal, and you would ask students to begin to infer about the picture. Who could have created these marks? What could have created these marks? And then you kind of scroll down and you talk to them about, what do you see happening? How have things changed? Have your inferences changed? Similar to a hypothesis, an educated guess. And then we look at the last set and we talk about what could have happened in this area. And so this goes through the whole plan, the whole lesson on inferences and the hypothesis, basically the nature of science. And so I really suggest to you to go out and take a look at these websites. Now if we go back to our PowerPoint, I've also given you 2 links, one on what science is not, and so if you go in and you look at that, there's a PDF about all the things that science can't cover. And now as we wait for that to load just a minute, it seems to be taking a few extra minutes to load today. There we go. Right, science is not a process that can solve all kinds of problems. Science is not a process that ignores rules, because we know we have to follow the rules. We have to follow a process that seeks truth. But that truth is not an absolute truth. It's not an absolute fact, because different facts, different truths mean different things to people. Science is not a process that attempts to prove things. It's not a process that can produce a particular kind of explanation. For example, supernatural explanations cannot be used because we can't prove they're wrong, but we can't prove they're right. Science is not a process that produces absolute facts. There's always that risk, there's always that chance or uncertainty that we'll find something that will tell us that what we originally believed was false. Science is not a process that can be relied on for total objectivity or internal self-correction. If we do science poorly, just like any other human endeavor, there are things in that testing that are going to fail. It's not a process that's always properly used. Frequently it's misused. It's not a process free from values, opinions, or biases. There are many people who hold fast to either a faith-based type of belief or a supernatural belief. For example, there are people that believe in panspermia. Panspermia is the belief that seeds fell from outer space, perhaps from an alien being. Those seeds landed on Earth, and that's where mankind came from. There's no way that we can prove or disprove that, but there are people that still believe it. It's not a process based on faith. We can't scientifically go out and say we can prove that Jesus Christ was raised from the dead and 3 days later he came back and appeared to people on earth. We can read that in the Bible. We can find biblical artifacts that support that documentation, But scientifically, we can't go through and do an experiment on that to find that out. And that's one reason we can't mix science and religion. And it's not a process in which one solution is as good as another, or simply a matter of opinion. We have to have a rigorous analysis. We have to have a lot of explanation, and it has to be confirmed with data. It's not a hunch, it's not an idea, that's a hypothesis. A theory is something that we have been able to prove over and over, and prove is not a good word because we just talked about that, but replicate and get the same results over and over, a well-tested explanation, until we have a better explanation. And so go through those 12 steps and think about what science is not. The last one on here I have is, where is religion in all of this? And we've talked about that in that handout that I gave you. Religion is faith-based, and again, we cannot test religion. We cannot test a faith. You know, people are going to believe what they're going to believe, and that's one reason there's so many different religions, because if we could prove one particular religion one particular way, then we would, you know, have more of a scientific theory in that, and so we don't mix science and religion. Science, it seeks to search for testable evidence, form a hypothesis and a theory. Remember, back in school, a hypothesis is just a prediction. We call it an educated guess. And a theory is that broad explanation after you do many, many trials, many experiments, and collect huge amounts of data, and then you share that. You probably remember the 6 steps of the scientific method. For the purposes of this class, we're going to put those in order, but you need to know that we don't always follow those in an orderly fashion. We may do the first 2 or 3, 4, and then come back and make a new hypothesis before we ever draw a conclusion. But for this class, we're going to go in order just so that you remember that these are really important steps when working through science and the nature of science. Now, look at this picture. What do you think this says? Most of you probably think it says science. Wrong. It's not science. Basically, it's a combination of letters, SGI5, NG5. This is a good one to give to your students because you just made an inference, and some of you made the wrong one. And so we have to be careful. We have to test. We have to experiment. We have to collect data before we make that judgment. Now, the process of that scientific method, let's just walk through it one more time. The first thing we do is we observe. If I look outside today and the sky is cloudy, then I may make that hypothesis that it's going to rain today because it's cloudy. Or I may say, you know, it's the sky is blue outside because you know, it's August, which is kind of silly. I can't test that. You need to come up with an observation that's testable, a hypothesis that's testable. But we come up with questions. You know, my cat has long fur. Why? Either maybe because his parents had long fur, or because he lives in an area where it's cold and he needs that thicker fur. Other questions that students could test. What doorknob in school has the most germs? Do girls have faster reflexes than boys? Does the color of a light bulb affect the growth of grass seeds? How could we find this out? What could students do? This is problem-based learning. Let them come up with the questions and let them find the solution. You just help them and guide them. Develop a hypothesis, an educated guess. If this happens, then this will happen. For example, if I grow grass seeds under green light bulbs, then they grow faster than plants growing under red light bulbs. Could we test that? Absolutely. So that's the fun part. We come up with the questions and the observations, we come up with a hypothesis, and then let your students run the experiment. This is part of the science fair. And this is what's lacking in our schools. We don't have enough teachers that will consider using experiments and teaching students how to do real science and compete in these science fairs. They can win a lot of money in each year's academic rodeo. So let's design a test. If students wanted to do the grass seeds, they could put grass seeds under a green light bulb, maybe grass seeds under a red light bulb, observe them for a couple of weeks. We'd also set up grass seeds under the regular white light bulb because that would be similar to the sun, and we can compare that. That would be our control. And then we collect the data. We do the analysis. There are variables, and you need to understand what variables are. You have an independent and a dependent variable. The independent variable is what you change. In this example, the only thing that we're going to change is the color of the light bulb. The dependent variable is what happens in result of us creating the independent variable. So what's going to happen as a result of changing the light? The grass is going to grow or it's not. So that's our dependent variable. It's dependent upon the color of the light. And then we have a control, which is a constant. A lot of times in an experiment the control is water. In this example we're using white light, an uncolored bulb. That's our control because then we have something to compare our results to. Question. One cow is fed a growth hormone and another cow is not. After a year, both cows are weighed. What is the independent variable? I'll give you just a minute to think about that. The answer is B, the growth hormone. The independent variable is the one thing that's changed. We don't change the cows, we don't change what they're fed, we don't change the water, we don't change the temperature, they're in the same environment. Just like the grass seeds, we're not changing the soil or the pots or the types of seeds or the amount of light. What happens when we give the cows growth hormone is the dependent variable. So in this instant, our independent variable is giving them growth hormones. When we weigh them, that weight is the dependent variable. And so then we draw a conclusion. If the grass under the green light bulb grew faster, we were able to prove our hypothesis. If it didn't, our hypothesis was wrong. Make sure you tell students it's not a bad thing if your hypothesis is wrong. You still discovered something. And we share our results. And time again, if others get the same results from the same experiments, then we will conclude we have the best possible guess, the best possible educated guess, and that's a theory. Scientific theories must be falsifiable because we're going to collect data, we're going to do hypothesis testing, and many times they are proven false, and we come back to the drawing board. A theory, again, is an explanation. It's the best explanation that has some evidence over time to support it. It incorporates facts, laws, and tested hypotheses. In other words, it's the best guess until we can prove it false. One term I think you do need to know is constructivism, and you've heard of constructivism. We talk about it when we talk about the 5E model. You probably talked about it in your lesson planning class, in your teaching skills class, but Piaget, Dewey, and Vygotsky, they all supported the theory or the notion of constructivism. It's the act of doing. We want students to create and construct knowledge on their own because we want them to get the meaning out of things. When students work to answer scientific questions and they do experiments and create explanations, they're using scientific inquiry, hands-on exploration, constructivism. Finally, I want you to watch the video on Mythbusters. This one is on Mythbusters and Mentos and Coke, and it's really fun, and students like this. You could have them watch it, then go back outside maybe and replicate it, and then think through the scientific method. I've also given you a handout to go along with this, and so at the conclusion of this PowerPoint, watch the video, answer the questions on the handout, and then come back and discuss that on the Facebook page. Could you use this with your students? You know, perhaps if they're young, you could do it as a demonstration, and if they're older, you know, perhaps you could use it as a individual or a group project. But think about what kind of safety equipment you would need, and could you actually come back and do this? Would they get something out of it? Would they learn the nature of science? See you next week.